Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Shady Oak Ministries. I'm of course Shady Oak, and I will be doing my poorest impersonation of Donald Trump because I personally, frankly, I think this is going to be amusing because today we're going to be talking about the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah, he was a really cool guy, and he's my favorite guy, favorite book of the Bible, because he built a wall. Okay, we're going to build a wall. We're going to see how Israel built their wall. We're going to discuss this history, okay, and we're going to discuss how we're going to benefit from this knowledge, this wisdom. We're going to look back at the things they did right, and we're going to look and see how they apply in our lives today. So with this in mind, with this single thing in mind, we're going to discuss the who. Okay, we're going to discuss the what. We're going to discuss why this information was given, where it took place, and how they all got this down. First, understand that Ezra, okay, the guy who read the first book, he also recorded this history. He was the scribe, okay, but Nehemiah, he also had a part in this. That's why it's called the book of Nehemiah, not Second Ezra. Secondly, understand this is eyewitness history. When we're talking about this, okay, don't believe the fake news. The fake news that tells you all this stuff is just made up. We can verify this. Okay, you go to the British Museum, you go to all the different places, you go to Israel, you can verify these events took place when they did, and not just from the Israelites. Okay, we talk about this. We're mentioning real people, real places, Persia, okay, we got the kings, we got all the governing officials. It's going to be great. Okay, you can trust this information to be accurate. Lastly, we got 5th century BC Israel. This is where they were recording their history as they reestablished their identity and got back exactly what made Israel great again. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about history, okay? So that's where we start. We start with Nehemiah. Nehemiah, he's still in Babylon. He's helping out the king, okay? The king had him at his right hand. He was his cupbearer, and that's a dangerous job, okay? Especially when you got all the people gunning their heads out for you. See, the Middle East, it's a disaster. When they have public security, okay, they don't have Secret Service, especially not for the catering, okay? They'd go for best optional, luxurious, phenomenal things, but when they put in front of them, they can't tell if they're poisoned. So they'd have Nehemiah. He'd eat it, and he did a phenomenal job. He put his life down on the line for his boss, his king. And this king, he really liked this Nehemiah. He was a Jew, okay? And just like the Jews had done amazing things for him, Israel, they were phenomenal. In the time of captivity, they'd only been doing good, and it was a real demonstration of character for him. However, when king, whose name was Artaxerxes, okay? Artaxerxes, he received news that Israel was rebuilding their temple, but it wasn't going well. Bad reports, the Samaritans, all the media, all the fake news, it was going after them real tough. But it wasn't fake news, it was real news, and that's sad news, okay? So when we're talking about this, he decides, he knows that God takes his calls, okay? That's the key, is understand, God takes your calls. He brought his matters to God. He prayed for his nation. And he prayed for three things that he prayed for. Firstly was the goodness of God. He didn't focus on himself. He didn't focus on all of his what to do. He just said, look, God, you're good. Okay, that's a good place to start in prayer. Second, he understood, look, we're not good. If there's anything that comes between you and God, you got to deal with that right away, okay? And frankly, that's a lot of things. Okay, a lot of things that the media could talk about. Not all of it is fake news. So you got to talk about these things. Admit them to God. We talked about this in Ezra. We could talk about it here too. Then lastly, Nehemiah, he reads the promises from his word. He says, look, God, you're not fake news. You're going to talk about these things. You're going to do them. So I can trust you. I'm not going to do these things. You're going to do them. It's going to be phenomenal, be luxurious. We're going to build a wall. It's got to be God who builds that wall, not Nehemiah. Okay? So Nehemiah, chapter 1, verse 5. And I said, I pray, Lord God of heaven, O great and awesome God, you who keep your covenant and mercy with those who love you and observe your commandments, please let your ear be attentive and your eyes open, that you may hear the prayer of your servant, which I pray before you now, day and night, for the children of Israel, your servants. Okay, he establishes that relationship. And confess. There's that word, confess, to say the same thing, right? the sins of the children of Israel, which we have sinned against you. Sinned against you. Both my father's house and I have sinned. Notice he doesn't go into details. He just says, I have acted very corruptly against you, and have not kept the commandments, the statutes, or the ordinances in which you commanded your servant Moses. He was a great guy, okay? And remember, I pray, the word that you commanded your servant Moses, saying, if you were unfaithful, he's quoting the Pentateuch, okay? The Torah, all this phenomenal writings. You are unfaithful, I will scatter you among the nations. But if you return to me and keep my commandments and do them, though some of you were cast out to the farthest part of the heavens, y'all not going to come back. Yet I will gather them from there and bring them to the place which I have chosen for you as a dwelling for my name. Now, these are your servants and your people, whom you have redeemed by your great power. So understand that. He's putting credit where it's due. Okay, he's starting from the top and going to the bottom. He's going straight to the CEO. But it's not the CEO of Trump Tower. We're talking about the CEO of the universe, okay? He's someone you want to take your calls from. When we're talking about this, your servants, your people, you've been redeemed by your great power. God kept his promise. They disobeyed. They got cast out. It was terrible. But now they've been brought back, and they didn't want to make that mistake again. So they deal with their sins, okay? They focus on God. And lastly, and frankly, they make sure that God's the one who's going to do things right this time through them. So he prays, let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and to the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name. You have to want a relationship with God if you want it at all. And let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man. Now understand, this is as he was speaking to King Artaxerxes. When you come before the king, this guy's making all the decisions, right? So you don't want to bum him out. And if you bum him out, he's just going to go and say you're fired, except it wouldn't be you're fired on a Celebrity Apprentice. You just cut your head off and deal with it all over. Never see that face again. But he liked Nehemiah, okay? Nehemiah was a good guy. So when Nehemiah was sad and he heard about Israel, he prayed to God for strength to be able to give him the will to speak his mind to Artaxerxes, and not his mind, but the mind of God, okay? So we're talking about this, and he specifies, he says, for I was the king's cupbearer. There's a good job there. Dangerous job, but a good job. Secondly, this is hard. Nehemiah goes to his people. Okay, after the positive relationships with the king, he goes and was more than willing. He says, Nehemiah, what do you need? Okay, I'm not going to have the Israelites pay for it. We're going to make the Persians pay for it, and I'm the Persians. What do you need? So he says, okay, if I'm going to build a wall, we're going to be secure about this, establish our borders, then we're going to have to focus. Okay, we're going to have to focus on the one thing that matters most, and that is building a wall. So he gets all the wood, he gets all the metal, he gets all the tools, he gets all the resources, he gets all the gods, he gets everything he needs to do a good job, okay? That is his goal. Now, Nehemiah, he gets all the resources, and then what does he do? He prays. Okay, God takes his calls. He's making sure he's dialing that number on speed dial right now. He's not going to do this. He's not going to do this on his own. He's going to make sure that it's not just the nation of Israel. It's going to be God's nation. He'd be the one to make sure that this wall works. Okay, so Nehemiah, he builds a wall. And going after the king's heart, he made sure that everything would be done to honor God. And that's when the nation of Israel, they were surrounded by their enemies. They're being practical. They focused their attention on setting up security. So they're going to have to establish the nation while Ezra, you remember him? And this other two prophet pals, these guys are phenomenal. Hezekiah, Zechariah, all these folks, they take my calls, okay? These are the good guys that you got a hold of. Great people you want helping rebuild your nation. They were making Israel great again. They focus on the temple. Nehemiah builds the wall. Okay, so while they're building the wall, Nehemiah, he starts getting death threats. Okay, that's when the fake news shows up. The fake news, but the fake news is actually true news, and that's bad news. Because when the bad news comes in, they get all these harassing statements, okay? They start making fun of him. They harass him on Twitter. They're just taking all these things out of context, okay? They're not understanding what you meant by all these things, and so they make fun of you. They say, oh, this fox, This fox is going to jump over that wall and knock the whole thing down. It's like Mozilla Firefox. They're going to be worse connections than Comcast, okay? So we're talking about this. We're talking about this whole problem going on with the Samaritans, okay? And the Ishmaelites and all these other folks. They were the ISIS, okay? They were making fun of them. Then they were attacking them. They threatened them. They said, we're going to kill you in your sleep. So they said, okay, well, we'll sleep with a gun under our pillow. Except they didn't have guns. They had swords. But they made sure when they were working, they had one hand with the sword and one hand with the pickaxe, one hand with the tools. Okay, they were doing a good job. So the Israelites, they were secure. They didn't get any attacks. That's when things got interesting. Because when they started to work on this, okay, they started to get nervous. Okay, I'd be too. If I was on the ground, I'd make sure, if we're going to do a refugee crisis, make sure the storm's passed first. But that's when the problems really started to come up, okay? Because when these problems came up, they dealt with them. They made sure the people of Israel were armed, okay? Make sure their Second Amendment rights were preserved. But you also have to understand, when you're still in a fight, you're still scared. So, they asked, what can we do to get this wall up as fast as possible? We're having the Persians pay for it, but it's still not up yet. So Nehemiah, okay, he says, we're making a concerted effort. It's not me making America great again. It is we will make America great again. Except it wasn't America, it was Israel. Okay, Israel was making Israel great again. And Israel was the one who was giving God the opportunity to work through them. So they made it their business, okay? They focused on their own work. They made sure their businesses grew. They made sure that their homes were protected. So they built just the parts of the wall that were in front of their houses. And therefore, when they were building this wall, they got it done in 2 months. That's phenomenal work. Record setting. It was luxurious, phenomenal. You would have loved it. Okay, so that's when Nehemiah, okay, they start to go after him. They get the wall up. They're building the temple up. And now the attacks come towards him. They try and call him out privately. They say, hey, no gods, no security. Why don't we just sit down and have a meal? They were planning on killing him, okay? This was the fake news coming to a new low. But when they were doing this, okay, Nehemiah, he didn't buy it. He didn't do it. He just focused on what he had to do. He did his job, okay? So when he did this, he did his job. And that's when the people that were against Nehemiah, they started to double down. They then turned to his CEO. Okay, they focused on his boss, and that's never a good place to be when you're finding yourself in the middle man. It's their word against theirs, against your word, unless your word is good. And that's where Nehemiah's character came in handy, okay? He didn't have to worry about what they said to the king because the king knew him, okay? You get in good with the boss, you'll be good with the employees. And if the employees aren't good, you're still good with the boss. It's these basic economics that helped me build up the Trump empire, okay? And that's what I recommend. It's in The Art of the Deal. It's my second favorite book, second only to the Bible, okay? It's a phenomenal book. You should read it. Well, that's when Nehemiah starts dealing with other people, okay? The bullies, the fake news, they didn't work. So they start going after other things. They tried lying to Nehemiah. They tried getting the Persians to come after Nehemiah. He ignored all of them. He trusted God to protect him. And that's when he understood that fine quote from Jesse Kelly. He was going to be a senator, but I recommend you follow him on Twitter. He's almost as much against the fake news as I am. Okay, he said, when the mob comes after you, you need to remember your only defense will be those that you've made. Your only defense will be who you've made yourself to be. Until that point, this impression is exhausting my oxygen. I'm having to focus here. Jesse Kelly, follow him on Twitter. He's a model American. You'll love him. Nehemiah, he focused on his relationship with God, okay? He focused on his relationship with God and other people. He knew the right people. They took his calls, okay? And when he made the right calls, he knew the king wouldn't buy all that. He wouldn't buy into the fake news, okay? He knew Nehemiah, and so he'd back him up later. He trusted God, so he didn't have to be afraid. Now, this is when Ezra starts to come in again. Ezra, he starts reading the book of the law. They go through the whole thing. It takes 2 days, and they love it, okay? They're reading prayers in schools, reading hymnals in schools. They're teaching the Bible, okay, in schools. They're restoring American values. They're making Israel great again, and it's only great if they got a great God, so they're knowing what he talked about. And they read all the way from Genesis, okay? They start in the Torah, and they go through to the Exodus, and the Leviticus, and the Numbers, the Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy, the Pentateuch is all reviewed. Okay, we're good with this. They go through the Torah, then they do the Joshua, then they do the David, then and frankly, the Kings. They gotta focus on the things that were important. I wouldn't be a Saul. I think I'd be a Solomon. Okay, we're talking about a lot of successful commerce. We're talking about trade. We're talking about open borders, but we're talking about closed borders. Okay, you thought I had you fooled. Solomon, okay, frankly, his open border policy, we're talking about this, probably not his wisest move. Probably wouldn't end up with all that wives. Okay, I focus on my current wife. Okay, we're good with that. So we're focusing on this. I guess I do have a lot in common with Solomon. I'm wealthy. Okay, I'm very good for myself. We're talking about a lot of attractive women. Okay, we're talking about the horses. I don't own a lot of horses. I know Solomon, he was a quality stableman. So we're talking about that. I'd definitely be a Solomon. But we're talking about this. Ezra, they just finished building all their homes. They finished building the temple. Israel's great again. So what do? They thank God. They thank God for it. They focus on their relationship with God. And they build what are known as the Feast of Tabernacles tents, where they just had built their homes, so they're grateful for them, and they remember their history. Okay, they go back to their founding fathers. When they were wandering through the wilderness, okay, they were going in the desert, frankly. Moses, I would have just gone straight, but God had other plans, so you follow your God. You follow God. We're doing good in the nation, okay? I won't argue. But we're talking about this. They're grateful that God gave them their land, so they celebrate this by separating themselves from their homes. And then they leave their homes and they live in tents during the Feast of Tabernacles. It was luxurious. It was phenomenal. They loved it. And that's when they start talking about their relationship with God. They start confessing their sins. And that's when they reestablish their covenant with Israel. Okay? The Israelis, they focus on their relationship with God. And that's when they sign on the dotted line. We will keep this law now that we know it. Okay? Now that it's in writing. It's not going to be on Tumblr. It's not going to be on Twitter. We're going to have this in writing. We're going to read the Bible and we're going to live by it, because that's what defined the nation of Israel. And this was a very good thing, because understand, as they prayed for each other, as they confessed to each other, we talked about this a lot in the previous book. When we're talking about prayer, James 5, verse 16, I believe it is. No, it is. Yes, 15. James 5:16. I'm running low on oxygen. You'll have to humor me. Confess your trespasses. Trespass means to deliberately sin to one another, and pray for one another that you're talking about other people? No, we're talking about you, may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. Okay, and Nehemiah, he was nothing if he wasn't a prayer. Okay, he prayed a lot. He was they called him the praying machine. Okay, so Nehemiah, he rededicates himself. He doesn't just lead the nation. He doesn't just say, you follow God. He says, I'm not going to sell it unless it works at home. And I'm going to make a quality business out of it. Okay, that's what made America great. I mean, Israel. We're talking about Israel dedicating themselves. And Nehemiah, he was in Israel. He made the personal choice, okay, to rededicate himself and the nation to God. So, Nehemiah, he leaves the nation, going back to his job as the cupbearer with a reminder of their history, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. He reminds them why they didn't let the Samaritans build their temple and their wall. Okay, that was the idolatry, the compromise, not good ways to go. Then they remind them the Sabbath. Okay, the Sabbath was something that they, as the nation of Israel, the nation of Israel needed to keep. We're talking about a nation, that made this covenant. But when we're talking about us today, and frankly, if you're going to talk to me about this, let's do so. But let's do so privately. Otherwise, you'll be treated as fake news, and I'll just delete you. Okay, I'm just not going to deal with it. But we're talking about Israel. Okay, all the commandments, all the 10 of them. We're talking about the 10 commandments, the big ones, Exodus 20. We're talking about this. They were all specified and repeated and practiced by the disciples except for that one. Jesus is our Sabbath. If you want to take a day off, that's phenomenal. That's great. That's perfect. But don't think that just because you do something, frankly, that someone else isn't as holy as you because they don't worship your holy day. Now, He also, Nehemiah, he was a phenomenal guy. I'd love to have him on my cabinet. He donated his own personal wealth. He was a good off guy, but he used his wealth to help the people. He reached out to the people who couldn't be paid to work, and he let them eat at his house, okay? It was the office refugee program. They invited him into his homes. They're legitimate refugee programs, okay? And he donated this of his own free will. Likewise, he publicly condemned the people who were taking advantage of the poor, and that was breaking God's law. So when they were doing this, they were told, now that you've read the law, now that you know that's wrong, now that you've been told that it's wrong, this is your last warning. Strike 3, you're out, Buster, you're fired, okay? And then lastly, before leaving, he swept the nation a second time. Make sure, always do something second. If you're going to make sure you're going to do it right. He swept the nation a second time of anybody that was getting into idolatry and making the same mistakes that got them all kicked out of the land for 70 years. Learning from their mistakes. They got to take them seriously. And if you follow these rules, remember Nehemiah, he's a phenomenal guy. Learn a lot from him. You pray a lot. Okay, you focus on God, and your power is going to be top-notch. You'll be luxurious, phenomenal. You're going to love it. Secondly, understand, you deal with your sins. You aren't going to focus on prayer on yourself. You're focusing on who you're talking to. When we're talking to God, he takes your calls, but you're still talking to God. So you talk to God. You tell him that you don't deserve it, but you gave it to him anyway. You say thank you. And you first and foremost, you say, God, you're God. I'm not. Okay, that's what you got to specify. And lastly, learn from your mistakes. Okay, don't just pray and then think everything's going to be fine. You got to find the art of the deal. Okay, you got to practice what you preach. And that's what we can learn from the book of Nehemiah. So this history, okay, I hope it helps you out. And thank you all for listening to this study. And as well, humoring me as I did all of that. Oh man, my lungs are flat. If you want to ask sincere questions, leave them in the comments below. Yes, I will be doing this study over in a normal voice. I just couldn't help myself. If you want to encourage the ministry, please do so. But most importantly, if you think someone would find a good laugh out of this and perhaps a good Bible study, 2 blessings in one, please share it with anyone you feel would be blessed by it. Thank you for your time and listening to this study. Remember that Jesus loves you. I'm going to go pass out now.